All right, everyone, as folks start getting into the room, we're just going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar today. Today, our topic is kind of timely as we're heading into Q4 of the year and approaching kind of the retail holiday season is, will there be happy holidays this year? An economic forecast. My name is Kevin Miller. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Chmura and will serve as your host today. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items to quickly go over. Everyone always asks if we will send out slides afterwards, and the answer is yes. We will send out an email with a link to a recording of the webinar and then a link to download the slides as well. So keep an eye out for that. You can usually find it on our website and through the JobsEQ platform as well. It'll take us probably at the end of this afternoon or early tomorrow to get all that stuff set up. So we'll send it out to all the registrants as soon as we have it. During the webinar, please do ask questions. We highly encourage your participation with those questions. You can go ahead and put any of the questions in the chat, which I see some folks are already using to say hi. That's great. You can either put it in the chat or in the Q&A section. If you put a question in the chat and you see it disappear, I sometimes move them over to the Q&A just so I can keep everything organized. So no worries, just know that it is there and we'll get to them at the end. Now let's go ahead and get started. So speakers today, we had to call an audible and pull in Francesco Renna, who's our Director of Consulting and Senior Economist, to step in for our CEO, Chris, today, who was feeling a little bit under the weather. So all that said, speakers today will be, like I said, Dr. Francesco Renna, our Director of Consulting and Senior Economist, and then Greg Chmura, who is the Chief Quality Officer and VP of Services here at Chmura. For those of you who are new to our webinars, we always like to start with a little bit with, just a quick overview of who we are and what we do. As a company, we provide labor market data analysis through three main offerings: our JobsEQ software, consulting services, and then access to that data. We were founded in 1998 by Chris, our CEO. And just one thing to note, it's exciting to note that we're nearing our 25th anniversary, which will be in December of this year. We have offices in Richmond, Virginia, where me and Francesco are located, and Cleveland, Ohio, where Greg is. But we do serve clients, literally hundreds of clients all over the country. As a team, we care about helping our clients get access to the data they need to help their communities, companies, and organizations grow. And really just kind of when we're thinking about our guiding principles and kind of what we strive to, and it's truly that adherence to excellence. Excellence guides us and is always what we strive for in customer service and data quality. And we often do hear from clients about how these two things differentiate us from similar products in the market. Kind of talking about those markets, just introducing some of those folks to Chmura who don't know us. Primary audiences we serve are in 6 verticals. We serve corporate, economic development, education, site selection, staffing, and workforce. And then here you can see a representative sample of the clients that we do serve in those verticals. You'll see anything from major corporate clients, major consultancies, through 2- and 4-year educational institutions, all the way down to public sector clients in economic development and workforce development. The consulting services and software we have really can serve a lot of different verticals with their use cases that they need. Just kind of one of those examples of services and resources that we do provide. You'll see here is a weekly economic update. So this goes out usually over the weekend and gives an overview of what's going on in the national economy. You'll see national economic data and trends, as well as providing analysis of what happened the week before in the economy. If you are interested, the link here, which you'll get in the slides afterwards, will allow you to sign up for the update that you'll get weekly. And there's also, if you can't get to this link, you can also go to our homepage, chmura.com, and scroll all the way to the bottom, and there is a link there. And one last thing before we get into the actual topic of the webinar is just to let for all of our JobsEQ users in the JobsEQ community, we are hosting our next users conference in January, coming up in Orlando. We chose to go somewhere warm in the winter. So just kind of another carrot to dangle to get people to go there. We do have a great lineup of speakers and sessions for attendees. If you go to the events page on our website, you're able to see the agenda and speakers. And just to let everyone know, our early bird registration deadline is actually tomorrow. So you can save a few dollars if you go ahead and register early. Like I said, the easiest place to find the registration link is on the events page at chmura.com, or you can actually get it through the login page of JobsEQ. We hope a lot of you can join us. So now, all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Francesco to get us started. Thank you all for joining us.
Hello, everyone. So I'm pretty sure you have noticed that the air is getting crispy, the sweaters are out, pumpkin lattes are everywhere, and we know what's coming next, right? It's holiday season. And why is holiday season important? Well, it's important because about 20% of retailers' annual sales are actually from these very, very important 2 months that are coming up. And so we at Chmura, we will have to give you some insights about what is likely to look like this upcoming holiday season. Some uplifting numbers. Employment in United States is up. It's been growing steadily after the collapse due to the pandemic, COVID-19. Now we are above the pre-pandemic levels. So employment means that people are earning an income, and as such, they're going to be able to spend. So that's on the positive note. It looks like there's a lot of people, more and more people in the United States are currently employed, and that should boost spending in the coming months. Another positive note is the fact that wages in recent months have been actually growing faster than in the past. Although this trend is on the declining side, as we can see from about mid-2022, but at the same time, inflation has been higher than average than in the past 20 plus years. So in terms of real terms, yes, workers are earning more than in the past, but in real terms, don't be fooled. Those are just very marginal increases in real purchasing power of workers. So yes, more money, but adjusted for inflation, it's not clear if people are really better off, especially when you differentiate between skilled and unskilled labor. So the big question is, what is likely to happen to spending? And one way to answer to that question is to look at some recent trend. So the chart in front of you shows what is the inflation-adjusted retail sales since the early 90s. And as we can see in the last couple of years, sales have been flat. If you look at nominal terms, sales have going up, yes, but the reason why people are spending more money, that as consumers, the reason why we go to supermarket and it feels like every time we pay more and more for the same food does not mean that we're buying more food. It's just that the food is becoming more expensive. But in real terms, after you adjust for the change in the cost of everything we buy, the amount of sales has been pretty flat for the last 16 months. The same concept can be seen in this chart, where we can see that after 2022, there were the changes in the percent of change, the annual percent of changes in inflation-adjusted retail sales have been just either on the negative side or just barely above the 0 point. As a curiosity, in the latest number, that is the September readings of the real retail sales, was up only 0.1% from last year, September 2022. So just really a minuscule increase in real spending of consumers. So what is then likely to happen in the next couple of months? Well, we have concerns that consumers are going to be under stress, and that is going to underscore their ability to spend during this upcoming holiday season. And where do we see that one? Well, we see, first of all, an increased use of credit card for payments, which is represented by the blue line in the chart in front of you. Credit card spending is also called revolving consumer credit. And in the most recent readings, that's, it's been like 15% higher than a year ago. So credit card usage is very high, but at the same time, remember that the Fed has been increasing steadily interest rates in a very aggressive manner, in a way that we have never seen before. So interest rates on the credit card bills that we have to pay every month are going up, right? And that is reflected, for example, the fact that consumers are not applying for non-revolving consumer credit, such as car loans or mortgage, because of the cost of borrowing money is been increasing, and that's the drop in the red line. So consumers are not making use of non-revolving credit, but they are still using their credit card to finance their daily expenses. Another issue that may affect the ability of a consumer to spend in this upcoming holiday season is the fact that October 1st was the first time in almost 3 years that everybody who has a student loan had to start paying back the loan. The moratorium was suspended, and so now we think that that's going to affect dramatically the disposable income and the ability of consumers to spend on discretionary consumption. So we said credit card interest rates are going up, and of course they're going up across all the board. They're going up about student loan, about car loans or mortgages, but also on balances on your credit card. And when your interest rates are going up, well, it's probably more likely that some people will not be able to make the payment. And we can see that in recent months, the amount of charge-off rates, and FYI, for those of you who don't know what the charge-off rates, those are the amounts they are actually write off from the books, from institutions, from commercial banks, because they think that they're a pure loss. They're not going to be able to recover that loss. So the amount of charge-off rates have been on the rise. I don't think that they are yet in a range that is concerning, but it's definitely on the upward-looking swing of the curve, and so we're going to pay attention to that movement in the next couple of months to see how consumers are dealing with their finances. And finally, what are some other important forecasts out there telling us about what is likely to happen during this holiday season? Well, I'm going to talk about two major players, the National Retail Federation that has a forecast every year about what is likely to happen during the shopping season. And they forecast this year to be yet another increase. So we're going to hit a new record. This time we're going to go up, and they predict an increase between 4 and 6%, which is lower than what we had last year. Last year, during the holiday season, sales went up by 7%. This year, lower, but remember that inflation this year is also much lower than it was a year ago. In December of 2022, inflation was 6.4%. Right now, inflation is about 3.7%. So it's, some of that decline in spending is actually due to the fact that we have made some improvements in controlling the increase in prices. And as a caveat, this forecasted increase in sales does not include automobile sales, gas sales, and spending on food and drinking establishment. Another important forecast comes from Deloitte. They predict a slightly smaller increase between 3.5 and 4.6. Again, last year, they using their framework, which is not just the month of December, but is the 3 months they go from November to January. So a year ago, during that period, sales increased by 7.6%. Again, this year, a little bit of a smaller increase, but most of that is due to the fact that inflation is way much lower currently than it was a year ago. And when we look at when we separate brick and mortar store sales from e-commerce sales, we expect a much stronger acceleration in sales happening on e-commerce sales. Why? Because, well, prices are definitely higher than a year ago or 2 years ago. So consumers are going to be shopping, going to be looking for deals online. It's easier to look at cheaper prices, to compare prices when you do the shopping online. So we can predict a stronger activity of consumers happening on e-commerce online. And as a matter of fact, Deloitte predicts an increase between 10.3% and 12.8%. So lower bound 10.3, upper bound 12.8%, while the National Retail Federation is expecting a smaller increase in e-commerce between 10 and 12%. So overall, we expect stronger increases in e-commerce than in the brick and mortar stores. But remember, brick and mortar stores are still the bulk of the sales. They account for about 70% of the total sales. And overall, yet an increase, but not as large as what we saw a year ago. But also keep in mind that the reason why the increase this year is smaller is because we have been making some progress in terms of fighting inflation. The last thing that I would love to point out before I pass the presentation to Greg is that consumer spending is important because it's the largest component of the GDP. It accounts for about 70% of the GDP. So having to monitor consumers' spending behavior is extremely important to make prediction about how the economy is going to grow next year. And a slowdown in consumer spending will actually give voice to all the economies that still currently expect a recession, including Chmura, early next year, in the first 2 quarters of next year. So hopefully we'll see the consumers are the ones that have been actually sustaining GDP during the last 2 years, the GDP growth during the last 2 years, and we'll see if they'll be able to pull it off also during this holiday season. That's all I have on my plate. And so, Greg, whenever you want.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Francesco. And early happy holidays to all of you. I hope you're all enjoying your early holiday flavors, whether it be in your lattes or in some other food item. What we're going to look at next are the job ads and what they might be telling us about what to expect coming up over the holiday season. So first thing I'm going to talk about here is the main data that I'm going to be using here and talking about, which are the job ads, and just to give you all a little bit of background on it. So the data set I'm going to be using is called RTI. It's Chmura's own data set. RTI stands for real-time intelligence. So there's over 40,000 websites that we crawl daily. We extract the job texts and extract information about them, and we deduplicate those. So all the counts that I'm going to be showing you in the next slides are deduplicated, meaning they're unique ads. The other thing to note is that all the counts are literally counts of ads. So, you could use the ads as proxies for hires or open positions, but we don't know that for sure. So just to be very honest about it, to disclose that, we're counting ads, and especially in retail, which we're going to be looking at, a certain company may put up an ad and leave it up for a month or 2 months or 9 months, and they may hire one person off that ad, or they may hire 34 people off that ad. We don't really know that, and so something to keep in mind. I mean, the data are very helpful. They're good for looking at various trends, but there are some uncertainties about that. So just to be fully disclosed about that. The other nice thing about, and the reason why we call this real-time intelligence, we update it these data every day, and it's a really good indicator for catching trends much more quickly than you'll see with other data sets. So, for example, we have a few blogs on our website that point out how you could see locally the impacts of, let's say, natural disasters such as a hurricane or forest fires, and where you could see daily the real and very quick impact of those events on the economy through what is being advertised in job ads. Okay, So the first few things I'm going to be looking at here, I'm going to focus on the retail area, just like Francesco was highlighting a lot. That's what we think about a lot when we think about, the holiday season and how that impacts the economy. The first slide here, I'm not showing job ads data, but some traditional employment data. And here I have three retail sectors that traditionally have the bumps in employment in the holiday season. So these are three of your larger retail sectors here, department stores, clothing stores, and sporting goods. And you'll see here these little bumps at the top. Those are each of the December employments. And so we have more employment in that time of year compared to the rest of the year. One interesting thing to note here is that the bump last year was a little bit lower than it was previously. So in 2021, so December 2021, that employment level was about 12% higher than it was compared to the average for the whole year. In 2022, the December employment was only about 8% higher than the rest of the year. So that was an interesting thing to see. For this coming year, we'll see if that continues to be a downward trend or not. But something to kind of be aware of there. Oh, the other thing I should mention, let me go back to this slide. When I'm talking about changes here, I'm going to be really talking about employment. And Francesco had a few comparisons where he talked about a change in sales, right? So we might be seeing the change in sales might differ from the change in employment. So with employers, we have, especially in retail, employers using more and more self-checkout. So where they need less employees on staff, right? So we could see differences in terms of the number of jobs versus how the retail business is doing in terms of sale. Okay, so what we have now are some job ads. So these would be active job ads. And here I'm looking at the primary retail occupations. So that'd be your retail salespersons, your first line supervisors of salespersons, and cashiers. So these are based on the SOC codes. And we have here active job ads by quarter going back from beginning of 2018 through the third quarter of 2023. The bracketed areas are showing you groups of years. So 2018 through 2022. And within each of those brackets, you're going to see that gray bar that represents the third quarter. And that's where the ads have a relative peak. So that's where for these retail jobs, you get the peak of ads relative to either the second quarter or the fourth quarter. So the stores are putting out the ads and trying to get ahead of hiring for the holiday season is what that would be consistent with. And so the third quarter is always higher than the second quarter and the fourth quarter. At least that's what we've seen for the last 5 years. However, if you look at 2023, we have a very different trend. Already, the ads have just really dropped significantly from where they have been the last several years. And the third quarter is already lower than it was in the second quarter. So if we continue the trend we had before, the number of ads are even going to drop further in the fourth quarter. So a very different view in terms of already the job ads which should correspond with the hiring on the retail side compared with the last several years. Okay, going on to the next slide. Here we have many of the companies, the largest retailers in terms of those occupations I showed on the prior slide, and how their job ads in this last 12 months has compared with the previous 12 months. And this is a query, by the way, I used just a small advertisement with our Talent Watch analytics. So this is a new analytic we have in JobsEQ. It's basically a different way to cut the data and examine the data. Makes it a lot easier to efficient to look at companies side by side. And so I probably wouldn't have done this slide unless I had that tool, because it's makes it really easy to look at these results. But anyway, the importance of this slide is you see that many different retailers have slowed down hiring compared to last year in terms of at least the number of ads, I should say. And it's not a specific type of employer, but many different types of employers. So Lowe's, Walgreens, AutoZone, a lot of different types of employers that we're seeing less hiring already, or less ads, I should say, in 2023 compared to 2022. The other thing I should point out is any single line item you have to look at carefully. It's better here to look at kind of the broad trend. Like, for example, Macy's here, you see like a big increase in ads. That may or may not mean they're doing a lot more hiring this past year. It could also correspond with just a change in the way they're doing their recruiting. Like I said, with the way you put out your ad. So I could put out an ad and leave it up for 3 months, or I could say, okay, instead of doing that, I'm going to put out an ad every month instead. And so the way we're counting ads is going to be different. So with Macy's, I would take that one with a grain of salt and say, well, there might be a different pattern that they've taken with recruiting this past year compared to prior. And also, and I see in the comment, Jason mentioning there that they've been pulling back on their stores. Yeah, and also there's been an article I know with Macy's where they said they plan to hire a few thousand less this holiday season compared to last holiday season. So they definitely seem to be pulling back rather than what that might indicate. The other thing we're seeing in the job ads is, as Francesco pointed out, we had increasing wages over the past several years. And we especially had that with the lower end of wages. And, as COVID was, the lockdowns were somewhat still in place. The labor market was very tight, it was very hard to fill certain jobs. We're going to, restaurants and so forth. And some restaurants couldn't be open as much as they could before, just because it was hard to hire those workers. And so we saw a large increase in wages. So especially late 2020 through the first part of 2022, we saw a big increase in wages. And here for those retail jobs that I mentioned before, cashiers, retail salespersons, and first line supervisors, all three of those had pretty significant increases in wages over that period. Since then, however, last several quarters, that's kind of slowed down, right? So we see it more flat since then. So that's the other important trend to take note of on the retail side. All right, now moving to the overall economy. Here we're showing the number of new job ads by quarter since 2019. And here I'm looking across the entire economy now, not just retail. And that dotted gray line at about 7.5 million. So that's the average that we've had over the last several years here. And if you look back here in the second quarter of 2020, that's when the COVID lockdown first occurred. And we had a dramatic slowdown in job ads. And when this occurred, if you just kind of focus on this area of the chart, this was very radical, very sharp decline compared to where we were before. And, you have some little variation here, but this was just a definite sharp decline. The very interesting thing to see is now look at the last two quarters. We've had a decline again. And this last quarter 3, 5.9 million, nearly as low as the second quarter of 2020. So that's very interesting to see that it slowed down so much that it compares in terms of number of new ads to what we see there in the second quarter of 2020. Okay, here again, I'm a little departure from the job ads. Just to point out a trend that we're going to be looking at again in the next slide. So in the last kind of long recession that we had, so we had the COVID recession, which was very short, but this is the recession before that where we had a sustained loss in jobs, right? That was the 2007 recession. This blue line at the bottom represents most of your industries and the employment. And we had a big drop in employment. Lots of jobs were lost, and it took a long time to recover those jobs. Two sectors that did not follow that trend were healthcare and social services, which is that top gray line. It just kept growing right through the recession. And then education, which it slowed down. It was about flat, but it did not have that decline like everything else. Okay, so during a recession, healthcare and education they're more resilient than other industries in general. So just keep that in mind as we then look at the next slide. So we're just going to put a pin in that for a second. Now, in this slide, we're back to looking at job ads. And here we're looking at the most recent quarter. So quarter 3 of 2023. And I have here across the bottom all your occupation groups. So you got healthcare, computer, management, legal, construction, all those different large occupation groups. And here I'm comparing the quarter 3 volume to the average since 2019. So, you know, which occupations in the last quarter have been above average or below average? And average is represented by 100%. That's the average right across the top there, that dotted orange line. And you'll see, without exception, everyone's below average. So the first big takeaway here is job ads have slowed down, and it's been across the board. All of these occupations are below average. That's the first big thing to note. The next interesting thing to note is, okay, who has slowed down the least? And look at here. It's healthcare, social service, and education. So it's those 3 groups that, you know, during a recession, those industries tend to be more resilient. So it's very interesting to see. And again, I'm not saying we're in a recession or going into a recession, but it's interesting to see that everything's slowing down, but those 3 have had the least slowdown. If we look on the other side, which occupation groups have slowed down the most? So computer and mathematical is the leader here. They really slowed down. Other occupation groups here are really big, important ones. So it's not any like niche kind of groups, but, you know, management, office, business, transportation, sales. So some very large groups have had the largest slowdown. So that's a pretty broad slowdown in terms of the economy and those jobs that have started to slow down in ads. If we look at which MSAs have slowed down the most, so this is the same time period, quarter 3 of 23 versus the average since 2019. The right side are the metropolitan areas with the largest slowdown. The left side are the ones that have the least slowdown, or even a few of them that have increased. Some things that are in common here on the left side, we see a few tourist destinations, right? Honolulu is there, Las Vegas as well. So that would be, you know, there has been a lot of pent-up travel demand because of after the lockdown from COVID. So those areas doing a little bit better in terms of the average over the past several years. That could play into what's going on in those metropolitan areas. And on the right-hand side, we see the ones that have the biggest decline. Some of those at the bottom, San Francisco, San Jose, a lot of IT computer. So that's consistent with the slowdown we've seen there. Also, it's interesting seeing some of those Utah areas, which have been growing a lot lately. So even though they're slower than where they were, it could be that they're not, it's a slowdown from a high growth rate. So not necessarily saying that they're, doing more poorly than some other areas. It's just slower from what they're used to. Okay, if we looked at some of the trends by different occupation groups, we'll see some of the variation here as well. So with the computer and mathematical up here in the upper left, you'll see here that the low point they were at in the quarter 3 is lower than they've been at any point in the last several years. So even after COVID hit, they're lower now than they were, and significantly lower than they were at any point there. With the transportation and material moving, which is right below it here, with that group, we saw a big increase right after COVID. So if you look back earlier in the graph there, we had a shift from, as people were kind of locked down, we had a lot more transportation needs there. And so we had a big increase in transportation ads, but that's really trailed off over the last year plus there. So we're lower there. Management in the upper right is lower, but it's not quite as low as its lowest point when COVID hit. Healthcare even slowed down, even though it's been going up. So they're in a good place kind of on average to where they were the last several years, even though last couple quarters they are down. Okay, the other thing I wanted to point out here and include a slide here, because you might be seeing all these ads, slides and saying, well, what does this all mean? Does it really, have an impact in terms of the actual economy? And the answer is yes, it does. And so here's an example of how the new ads in RTI track with the new hires per the JOLTS data. So the JOLTS is job hires. They track that. The BLS that's their time series. And here, new ads 3 months prior to the actual hiring taking place and being recorded in JOLTS, there's a correlation there. So this is where the new ads can be used as a predictor for hires 3 months down the road, basically. And you can see here how that corresponds. There's various fluctuations in terms of the noise, so it's not an exact correspondence. But one thing you'll see, the last several months we start having a departure here, and the job ads have started to go down, and even we could extend this, it's continued to go down as far as predictors. So there's starting to be a disconnect basically between the number of new ads and what's going on the employment side. So Francesco showed that slide very early on showing the employment increasing, and that's what the official numbers have been saying. And so there indeed is a disconnect that's occurring and growing. So we'll see how that resolves over the coming quarters as far as, but again, that's what the ads are doing. They're pointing downward. And so we'll see if the new hires with the employment numbers continue to hold true or if they start following those job ads. Okay, now with this next group of charts here, I'm going to bring together some different indicators and how they all relate to each other. So if we start with the upper left, here we're looking at the median duration of our job ads. So what we do here is we look at, so again, going to our Jobs EQ RTI data, and we're talking about how long an ad is up before it's taken down, which typically would be how long an ad is up before it is filled, right? And the longer an ad is up, that should correlate with that being harder to hire, right? So if it's difficult to hire a job, you need to leave that ad up longer. So if we see the duration going up, that should correspond with the tighter labor market, right? So if we start off there in the upper right and we look at 2019 and 2020, that establishes the baseline. So 29, 32 days is the average across all jobs across the whole United States for how long it takes to fill a job. Now, if we look at what happened in 2021, so this is when we had that labor market tightness that I referenced earlier. So we have, it was a lot harder to fill these jobs. So 40 days it took to fill the job compared to 32. If we look in the upper right, we have the quits rates. So this is coming from the BLS. That went up significantly. In the chart, it doesn't look like it goes up a lot, but this was really going to record levels. You may remember this as they were calling it the Great Resignation, right? There was a whole lot of quitting going on there in 2021, going to record levels there. So that was happening at the same time. If we look in the bottom left, in response to this, employers were much more desperate to hire people and get them, in the door. So the practice of sign-on bonuses really shot up during this period. And even in, occupations where that wasn't really a big practice, those like white-collar workers, that became an increasing practice. So that really shot up during that same time as employers were trying to get people through the door. And then on the bottom right, we have some wages. So again, based on some RTI wages data, and that was also going up significantly during that period. Now, as we switch from 21 to 22, we see back in the upper left, the duration went down. So that would correspond with the labor market being less tight, right? And the quits rate, it started to come back down. So fewer people, it was a little bit higher than it used to be back in 2019, but it was still coming down. Sign-on bonuses started to ease up and come back down a bit. It was still staying high, but coming down a bit. Wages in the bottom right were still pretty high. I mean, we had a lot of inflation in 2022, so that was helping keeping wages high at that point. Now, what is going on in 2023? This is interesting and curious because the things aren't corresponding with each other like they were before. So starting in the upper left, we have the durations going way back up again. And so even higher than it was in 2021. So that would imply that, okay, the labor market is now, again, super tight, right? What's going on with the quits rate? Well, here, it's interesting. The quits rate has started it's continued to go down. All right. So rather than more people, quitting and moving around, it's becoming less like so. On the bottom left-hand, we're looking at the sign-on bonuses. That's continued to go down. And the wages has also continued to go down. I mean, inflation has come down and that's helped, but also overall wages and with the sign-on bonuses coming down too. So it seems to be saying here that, there is an increased tightness, at least due to the duration, but, are the employers less willing or able to be, putting themselves further out to try to bring in those employees to get them through the door? So they're being a little bit more conservative, perhaps. That would be perhaps the story that we're seeing with all this. So it's a little bit different than it was in 2021. So just very interesting to see how all those things tie together. And finally here, with the duration, so I was a little bit suspicious looking at how high the durations were in the last 3 quarters. So here I wanted to look at it occupation group by occupation group. So I'm comparing 2021 durations to 2023, just to make sure that we could have a shift. Well, we definitely have a shift in mix of jobs in 23 compared to 2021. And, did that play a role in the longer duration? And it turns out that, no, that's not really the case. Really across all these occupation groups. I mean, not every single occupation group, but most occupation groups did have a shift to longer durations. Some of the bigger shifts you can see here, computers, transportation, and healthcare. So we're seeing that tightness across many occupation groups. Finally, I don't want to end on something negative. So just a little something fun here. What about those Santa jobs? So here, using our RTI data, I looked up, jobs for Santa, Mrs. Claus, any kind of Santa character, and just to see what those trends look like. And what do we have? Well, if you look at 1984 here, the peak of those job ads occurred in the 4th quarter, which kind of makes sense. 2019, again, peak in the 4th quarter, which kind of makes sense. In 2020, you see a lot fewer ads for those Santa Clauses, which makes sense because that was during the lockdown, right? In 2021, kind of curious, people were hiring your Santas earlier in the year. I don't know if there was some anxiousness about the job market for Santas, that they were trying to get them through the door earlier, but yeah, 2nd quarter and 3rd quarter is where we had the peak in that year. 2022, back to the 4th quarter traditional peak, and 2023. So this year, job ads are up in the 3rd quarter already. So we'll see what the 4th quarter brings. But again, Santa jobs looking up for this year. And that's all I have. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Kevin for questions.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that. It's a good look to see how in demand Santa jobs are. Haven't had that before. Just a couple of questions, and I see in the chat. Okay, a couple things that y'all will notice in the chat. Libby, one of our colleagues here on the marketing team, she did put the direct link for the users conference into the chat. So if anyone's interested in learning more, you can hit that there. I did have, and then Francesco, who in the chat is actually listed as Chris because of the last minute change, did put some information that may correspond to what we were seeing in those increased job postings with Macy's, which was kind of interesting that they're moving to small format stores versus the larger department stores and shopping malls. So that could be an indicator of why we're seeing them increasing job ads. So in Francesco, I did have Chris sitting at home send in a question via text. When we started looking at some of Greg's initial slides, things seem to suggest that retailers are looking at things with a very pessimistic view right now. The question is, does this suggest that we might be standing in longer lines at the store when we're shopping this Christmas season or holiday season?
I don't know about that. Wouldn't it study like because everybody will be shopping?
Well, because there'll be fewer employees in the store.
Oh, fewer employees in the store. I I would not rule that out. We see that in several sectors. I actually was surprised recently. I was traveling. I was surprised how long I had to wait before I could find an Uber driver to come and pick me up. I had to wait 21 minutes, which seems like, yes, that people are not hiring or they're trying to be on the safe side, and instead of over hiring, as they've done in the past 2 years, especially in the IT sector, a lot of companies that went crazy in hoarding labor, and now companies are being on the conservative side. So I wouldn't be surprised if the current decline in job ads would translate in longer waiting period at the mall because there's not enough staffing on the floor. And again, I don't want to make my own personal experience the rule, but I personally experienced that one 2 weeks ago at JCPenney, where I had to wait 20 plus minutes before I could actually talk to a salesperson. So yeah, that could be the reason also why more and more consumers are shifting away from the brick and mortar shopping, the traditional shopping strategy, to an online, because you don't have to wait in line before you can finish your order.
Great, thanks. And we did have one other question. So for anyone still with us, if anyone had any other questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat, and we can take them here. The other question that was posed earlier on was, could the decline in retail sales generate more lower prices and bargains for the consumer as we're approaching the holiday season?
Yes, I'll take this question unless Greg wants to add on whatever I have to say. Yes, we already saw that one last year. If you remember last year in 2022, there was this issue of shortages of just about everything, starting from the garden statues to refrigerators. And then when most of the supply chain problems were resolved, then there was a lot of goods on the shelves again. But because it all came all at once, stores could not sell fast enough. So what I did last Christmas, we had some pretty decent sales. And I expect the same to happen this year, simply because the purchasing power of the household, the typical household, is going down. All the savings that we managed to put aside due to the pandemic stimulus money that we see from the government, or the fact that we cut back on consumption during COVID, is quickly running out. So people don't have access to all the liquidity that we had in the past 2 years. So they're going to be by nature less prone to spend, and then consumers are going to try to boost their sales by dropping the prices. So I expect big sales coming up due to the fact that consumers are not as active in the market looking, to spend money, because the money is short. And then, one of the largest items that grew the most during 2023 has been food, and that's been the number one priority for families. So the money left over for discretionary spending is becoming smaller and smaller. So if retailers want to attract consumers, they have to drop the price.
Great, thanks, Francesco. I think that's about all of the questions that we had. We did have one other asking about if the slides will be shared. The answer to that is yes. Anyone who registered for the webinar will get an email with a link to a recording of the webinar and the slides. And if you don't get that email, or if it gets hung up in your spam filter like some do, within the next day or two, those will be also available to access on our website at chmura.com. So all that said, thank you all for joining us today. I think that was some great information. We appreciate your time, and if there's anything that we can do for you, please feel to reach out to us. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next webinar. All right, thank you all.